Okay, it says I'm online. Because the bitrate is too low, but it's working. Okay, cool. So we're live. Excellent. Thank you for joining. So today we're here. Welcome to the Q&A and critique number 29, 1700 UTC on Thursday here in the work arena in Erindale. So we're here hanging out with Devonshire, which is a good old friend of ours from a while back. He used to play a lot of Blender Royale, a very capable artist. And we also have Nikiti-san here, which is great. So thanks for joining, guys. And today is actually going to be quite of a personal guided tour, I guess you could say, about the progress of the painterly effect. And also we're going to take a look at two different techniques of using geometry nodes for the painterly effect. One of them is Billboards, the other one is using Vertex Color Transfer to instances. So Devonshire, would you like to say hello to whoever might be watching this later?
Hello, hi.
Great. So I would like to ask you a question first. What makes you interested in this painterly effect? You wrote me the other day about it, and I like the context. Do you think you could kind of explain it to me a bit more?
Context.
Yeah.
I just thought that it'll be useful for me, like on certain projects. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, all right. That's true. Well, okay, so first things first, I guess the update that I have for you is basically I'm working on this particle billboard system so that I can paint my particles on as brushstrokes from objects and their vertex colors. The reason being is I needed to create kind of like a glowing light effect, I guess you could say. Right now this is my shaded effect, but I'll probably minimize that later. So my concept here is I'm creating an environment like this. It's neon. It's a cyberpunk world. It's oil based. It's got these splotches of white light and then like blurry light around it. It's very common that you can see, but they have a different type of brush stroke. So my goal is to create this glowing effect with a different type of brush strokes inside my other painterly effect. So this is what I'm trying to develop, is kind of like create these lights, I guess you could say, and volumetrics inside the world. And so it's very characteristic where we have one blob of white paint, a blob of yellow paint, a blob of orange paint, you know, something like that to create a light. Basically, they're white blobs. So this is the world I'm working on right now. The world is basically the cyberpunk world with a little bit of art style and things like that. So now I'm just creating the elements. So I need some sky, I need some neon lights here, and I need some volumetrics coming on with the actual world. So now I'm starting to create the painterly materials for my canvas. Right, so is it clear what we're doing, more or less? And
Yep.
great. So, hello, Noah.
Hey.
Oh, and Nikiti-san, just to answer your question, they asked, what is the version I'm using? Is it like Maya? Well, it's B for Artist. Devonshire answered that, which is a fork of Blender. Use it. It's the same thing as Blender. You know, it takes a copy or a fork from Blender every week, and then it adds its own interface and redistributes it as an official release, separate from the Blender Foundation. So it has its tracker on GitHub, and you have your own release. Basically, I use it because I like iconography, so I can see what's in the menus without needing to read anything. And I also add it adds a lot of tooltips onto all of the geometry nodes. And it adds like a tool shelf here on the side, so I can add different, just quickly add different things like this. And you also have a tool shelf on the side here with all the operators, which Blender doesn't have, which is optional. And also 3 columns. And you have a customizable toolbar at the top, which has a lot of toolbars in many different ways. And it has a couple of other things which I can use to like customize my interface. So for example, lock the camera or unlock the camera, show wireframe or hide wireframe, or reset the view, or like switch to quad view or not, you know, without using hotkeys. And also like quickly switch between the node editors. Like here is the other concept of using shader nodes and then geometry nodes and compositor nodes all from the same node editor. So that's the key differences between Blender and Beef-Artist. But let's go back to where we were with the Painterly. So no problem, Kitty-san. I hope that answers your question. And we're going back to Devonshaw's walkthrough. And also we got a whole bunch of new people connected here. Pipple Snow, welcome. More of Smart Troid and Momo and Jaba. Glad to see you back.
Hello.
Hello. So we are.
I'm Russia. I'm see you looking at your YouTube channel.
Oh, great! Thanks. I'm glad that you could join us. If you have any questions, just feel free.
I don't know. Is the questions I'm in beginner.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
is research in I'm self-notice.
Okay, good. So I guess we're going to take you down the rabbit hole right now to show you some of these updates.
Yes, of course.
Can you tell me what software is that?
This is Blender with a custom interface, separate distribution. It's a fork called Beef-Artist.
So is it Blender? Like
yeah, it's Blender.
It's completely different.
Well,
where can I download that?
You can in the chat in the Q&A critique. Devon Shaw shared the link. So it's basically Blender 3.1 just with a separate interface that you can customize a bit more than Blender with icons. lots and lots of icons.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was 3ds Max or something. It was kind of like.
Yeah, but it's Blender. At the end of the day, this is just Blender. All right.
Thank you.
So let's go back to the beginning where we were talking about things from last week. And let me just save this scene and let me load up my other scene. Just to show you Devonshire. So last week we talked about the principles of Painterly. Were any of you here? Did I talk about that earlier? Do you remember the 4 principles that I had? So if you don't remember, I'll just quickly go over it.
I just know one, the depth, the size of the paint stroke should be like should normalize between different zoom levels. I don't remember what you called it, but that's all I know.
Good. All right, it's called coherent depth, I guess you could say. So this is my scene here, and I'm gonna go zoom into this sphere. As you can see, let me just go into rendered view so you can see it. If you take a look at this blue sphere, I'm going to go full screen. I'm going to hide everything and I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see nicely. As you can see, there's a texture on the brush strokes. So this is the first principle, all 4 of them. The first one is coherent scale, which means brush strokes need to maintain their scale regardless of the 3D distance. That's one of the key principles of Painterly. If you start to scale your brush strokes based on the distance, it will start to feel like it's more 3D instead of 2D. Because in 2D, you have a flat canvas, you have a brush stroke, and you're painting an illusion of perspective, but it's still on a flat surface with the same brush. So this is the case. So in this case, if I zoom in, you can see that the texture on the actual sphere is getting bigger and bigger as the object fills the screen, but the brushstroke remains the same size relatively to the zoom level that I have of the camera. If I zoom fully out, you can start to see that the brush stroke is now, it's a tiny little blotch, I guess you could say. That's one thing that I needed to figure out. The other thing that we need to do, the second pillar, is edge breakup, which is where I'm using basically Fresnel, or you could use geometry node particles to break up the edge. In this case, I'm using the same brush stroke to break up the edge of this brush so that it can break up the edge of the shadow. I'm rendering at low quality right now. But you can see, like, for example, this yellow or this pink circle, you can see that the edge is really nicely broken. So in this case, the edges of the paint, like if it's sharp in 3D, if we go to like, look at this 3D shape here, you can tell the edges are, it's a 3D model, right? Whoops. But if we take a look at the actual character here, and we start to work the design a little bit, we can start to break up the edges of his particular head, of this particular design, so that we can have a bit more, I guess you could say, painted in effect of his silhouette. So that's the next thing, is the edge breakup. After that, the third pillar that we were looking at was edge breakup. The other one was called the shadow terminator breakup. So if you take a look at the shadow on the head here, I have like this red shadow, yellow filling in, and then I have the skin color. If we go back to the spheres, the edge shadow terminator that you want to like kind of develop nice and quickly is you got to make sure that the edge of the sphere is not 100% smooth. So if I create like a new sphere, like this one here, and we take a look at the normals and make it shade smooth, you can see that the shadow shape is straight, right? In the painted shadow, it is no longer straight, so you have to break that up. And the last, and but not least, the thing you need to do is called, let me just make sure my background is showing. Just make it a bit smaller. Where is it? Let's make it bigger. I just need to make sure that the correct shader is on it. Oh, it is. Okay, let's go back to main. World view, yes. Zoom into the sphere. There we go. So the next thing that you want to think about is called post-processing. So post-processing is where you use the shader material of the object, the colors, the design, everything you want, and then you start to paint it onto the canvas to create your technique that you want. So for example, here I'm using Eevee. So unlike Unreal Engine or other things where I have a viewport post-processing, I have to use an Eevee refraction, incoming refraction onto a plane in front of the camera, which I call it the preprocessor, to kind of set up the effects. So in this case, I have like this paint affecting the bump of the paint texture with some specularity, and I have the border of this canvas that I've designed into the actual object, so that I can change, for example, the scale of the borders, you know, so I can actually start painting in the concept that I want. I can change the radius or the rotation and work it from there. Right, so now this is the post-processing effect, or that you want to add into your painterly to kind of give that extra oomph into your actual material. So those are the 4 pillars. Those are the things that we needed to look at nice and quickly. Coherent scale of the brush strokes, the breaking up of the shadow terminator, the breaking up of the edges of the model and the brush strokes, and the next thing after that was using post-processing to some degree to get that extra like design that you want from the actual material, so you can paint in the paint that you want. So here we go. This is my design that I'm working on so far. So the next challenge that we have today is basically how are we going to do volumetrics? How are we going to do billboards, and how are we going to use instances with these colors to kind of give us a bit more control to create these materials? So I have a question for you guys. Do you know what a billboard is, and do you guys know how to do it with geometry nodes?
I've never done it, but I have an idea of how it can be done.
Yeah, what's the idea?
So we can have an object behind the camera parented to the camera, which is like in the correct orientation, and we can transfer, like we can copy the orientation of that to whatever we want to billboard. Billboard being any plane which always faces the camera.
That's right. All right, so I actually quite like this. Looking good. So I'm just gonna leave it like that for now. And let's load up my billboard scene. And let me show you. I think you have done the correct thing. So we need to get the angle from the camera. We need to orientate the billboard to the camera. And then from there, we can like figure out the orientation of how we align it, right? Practically?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so where is my geometry node? Here we are. Oh, this is my study folder. Sorry, let's go to my library. Scenes, geometry nodes, billboards, number 2. I'm going to show you a couple of different types of billboards. So here we have my billboard scene. I'm going to full screen it a little bit, zoom in the camera a bit. And when I rotate the camera, you can see that every single, I guess you could say, instance of these planes are looking at me. They're looking at the camera. It's kind of nice. And if I like rotate this model, everything is struggling or trying to push its way to look at me in a certain way, which is pretty much exactly what I need to kind of create this billboard effect. This one, it doesn't. There's like it's stuck to the actual object. So let's just see how this kind of looks. So let's go in, take a closer look, go into our nodes, check out the node tree, and let's start breaking it down into pieces. All right, I'm going to go full screen so you guys can see. So the first things we want to look at is this. This is basically get the camera direction. All right. So in this case, what we need, first things, is you need to subtract the position of your instances or of the geometry with the location of the original camera, or relative. I think it's original. Yeah. So the original location of my camera, which I've turned into an actual override, is now being subtracted, and I use this to drive the rotation of my instance points. So first things first, you probably need to distribute points on your faces to whatever way you want to create your instances. I just outputted everything so I have a bit of control on random. These points go to another node called instance on points, which gets an instance onto the points. So the basic scattering setup for geometry nodes. And then in rotation, I use the align Euler to vector. So the way that Euler to vector works, or Euler, is you take the vector, which is the direction from the camera, and you align, you use the pivot point of the instance that you want to use. So in this case, I'm using the instance Z axis, and I want to align it to the X axis of the camera. Try and notice that it's a dotted line on this diamond. This diamond means it's a list of data based on all the position points on the geometry, and it moves into the rotation of the instance points, and that begins that rotation. So if we take a look at this model and we go and we rotate, notice that all the instances are rotating on the z-axis around the camera. That's basically it. That's how you make a billboard scattering. So here's the camera over here. This is the camera. It's pointing to this object, and this object's z location, this blue axis, pointing up in the z that we can see here, is trying to rotate on the z-axis to point towards the camera, which is over here, up there. That's it. That's a billboard. That's how you make billboards. But we have some billboards that are also rotating in the x-axis or the y-axis, or even x and y-axis and the z-axis. How do you do that? What do you think? Oops, I just showed you the answer. So basically, if you want more than one axis to rotate, which is important in my case because I want the billboards to always look at the camera, no matter if I'm at the top or the bottom, is I do the same thing. But in this case, I take the same rotation into the previous rotation, so it becomes kind of additive. And I choose the z-axis, the y-axis, and probably should choose the x-axis again. So that all three axes are pointing into each other. So I take the same camera vector and I link it back into the Euler so that the rotation in the Z pivot works, the rotation on the Y pivot works as well and feeds into each other, and then hits the instance and rotates the instance again. It's basically, that's the key difference. So that now, when I go into the camera view and look at this key object, all of these instances are rotating with a lot of effort to do it. Or I can do it with two of them. In this case, I could just hide this, and then it's just doing it with two axes, which is still pretty good. So that's the general concept, ZY. And so in this case, so now I can like create any type of geometry, and I can use this geometry as kind of like my volume cloud, I guess you could say, to create my billboards for the brushstroke system. If I go into, let's just hide it momentarily, and for example, move this plane up, or move this out, make it thicker, for example, a little bit like this, kind of make a shape here, maybe extrude this out a little bit, maybe go like, yep, yeah, that's fine, turn it back on. So now I've just kind of made myself a basic billboard cloud. If I rotate the camera, all the planes are looking at me, which is a nice flat concept for the billboards. Are you following? Is it clear? Or do you have a question there?
Yep, I have one small question. Like, if the camera is moving a lot, does it have gimbal lock sometimes? Like around the planes if it's moving?
The gimbal lock, yeah. For example, in this case, this one has gimbal lock. Right here. Boom.
Oh, okay.
So I might keep it as a stylistic choice, you know. But if you could probably add proper, because it's Euler, I think it is. I have to define an up vector, I suppose, of all of the instances, but I don't know that yet, so I just wanted to keep it nice and simple.
Hopefully Blender devs will add some quaternion rotation thing.
Or like an up vector.
In the future.
Yeah, exactly. Quaternion would help. Like
Yeah.
having an up vector of some kind. Or like a definition, like here in this position, we don't know if it's local space or world space. Here we have original, which is world space, and relative, which is local space. That's the closest thing that you have, but we don't have that with the point positions or the rotation from the nodes yet, from what I know. I mean, I'm not very good with this. So I'm kind of stumbling away through, and now let me show you how this could work with Vertex Color Transfer, which the user from this morning, his user handle is gurpete.exe, Gurpreet_exe, he helped me out. He gave me this idea where basically now I have these billboards, but I'm using the billboards with my brush stroke system to kind of create this interesting, I guess you could say, volumetric strokes pointing towards the camera, also affected by the light to some degree, so I can use this to drive, and also with the scale so that the brush strokes kind of maintain their detail, I guess you could say, to drive, and also being driven with the colors. So if I go into vertex paint mode and I paint with this bright yellow, I can now paint whatever thing I want. And if I wanted to make it more transparent, I can use this black to kind of fade the particles a little bit based on the material. It's kind of fun, you know. It's like it's some creative liberty for this kind of volumetric brushstroke system that I'm trying to create. So how did we do this? What do you guys have some ideas about Vertex Color Transform?
No idea.
No idea. I didn't have an idea this morning either, to be honest. So this is something new for me.
I have more questions.
Yeah.
This is the best I've seen in the day. It explained my view of Blender. Every time I've learned something new and new. Thank you for educations using this. Will there be tutorials for beginners? One more question: is there a book or descriptions of each node?
I think this is so new that there's not a lot of documentation. On Friday, Blender 3.0 should release, and on Friday they release the documentation for the official updated nodes. Here in B for artists, with the add nodes, you can actually mouse over every single node and it will tell you what the node does. Inside Blender, this is not possible. So if you like, you can use the tooltips to read a quick short description of what the nodes are and basically what they do, which gives you some idea. In Blender it's a little bit more difficult. Let me just show you why. Let me just go to Blender a second to give you a comparison. Let's go to a daily build. Let's do a 3.1 alpha. Let's just load this up nice and quickly. There it is, it's coming on. So tooltips is one way to help you start to learn what every node does, but you're going to have to use another version of Blender for that. But let me just load it up to show you. So let's go into geometry nodes, make a new node tree, Shift A, go into radius, and it says add a node to the active tree. That's all it says. Now we go to string, add a node to the active tree. Oh, that's terrible. So you can use this build of Blender, which is the same thing for learning, and it will say add instance to point. Let's go to, where were we? Input, position, add an input position geometry node, retrieves the input position of the geometry. So you can read the tooltips to get some idea from the interface, and then you can always go to Erindale. Erindale has a very extensive explanation of things. Bradley as well, he's a pretty big user here, so I highly recommend those guys to learn some things. And there's a couple of others, Ben as well, he's a good friend of ours here. So there's BBN, I think it is N19 or something, I don't remember, but you can always find Erindale and his recommended channels. There's Bradley as well. Bradley something. I have to find you the channels later. But knows is usually not for the faint of heart. So it's still a work in progress. Blender's coming out on Friday. The documentation should be released on Friday, hopefully as well, which means you can start learning it from there. But get involved here in the server. It really helps. You know, people like say, "Hey, how do you do this?" and they explain it.
Okay, thank you very much. I just thought there is a PDF file or descriptions of these notes. I'm hard is learning this Blender knows. Not descriptions, not PDF, no official documentations in
There are
Blender.
some documentations that you can find, I think, maybe, but it's from the old legacy one. So Blender documentation online. I think as soon as 3.0 becomes is released, then you can find the updated documentation. Because here we have documentation for 2.93. So these are 3.0 3.0 nodes. So once 3.0 becomes official, this update gets updated, or this manual gets updated, and then things get updated everywhere. So hang on for another week and you're good, I think. Makes sense?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, so let's go back to Vertex Transfer. So I'm going to open up the scene that Gurpreet shared with me. I'm going to go to Vertex Color number 1. Vertex Transfer number 1. Okay, so this is the example. Oh man, it crashed. 3.1. Sorry about that. So the basic theory is that you have vertex color groups inside a model, right? These vertex color groups, you can have a vertex color painting mode, which means you can use it to paint your textures, to create masks based on the vertex color. It's very performant, and it's also a good way to override your materials. So you could use, for example, I have, let's make a cube. Here's my cube. I'm going to go into vertex mode, color mode, press, go into vertex paint mode, and then I'm just going to fill in the paint texture to be black, for example. Change the color, and I'm painting this one vertex white. And you can change the color and paint the other vertex red. These are vertex colors. If you go into the mesh settings of the object, you go down to vertex colors, you can see that it's created a new vertex color. And you can have as many layers as you want. Inside the material, if I go to shading, you can create a new material. How do I access the vertex colors? Well, basically you get the vertex color node and you choose color. And you plug that in. Now, after it compiles, I can see in my material the same vertex colors from this model. Now, here's the magic of it. Vertex colors is defined per object. So I could start painting red and white over here, or change the color to like an interesting green and paint it over here. And I copy the material. If I go into render mode, the vertex colors of the same material. So this has material and this has the same material, but the colors are different. So that's the power of vertex colors. You can define vertex colors per object, regardless of the material. So you only have one material and as many vertex colors as you need. So let's go back to the color transfer node, which is in cycles. I'm going to switch to Eevee. And now we have this plane with a whole bunch of colors, and each instance has its own color, which is kind of nice. This is exactly what we need. So how do we do this? Basically, let's go into the tree. Let's go into the deep stuff. The first things first, we got the distribute points on face, just like before. We've got the instance on points with the instance and the actual geometry. And then we have to realize the instances. So the reason being that we have to realize instances is that vertex data can only be shown on geometry. So we need to make the geometry real, not fake, not instanced, but a real geometry, so that we can assign a material to it. So here we have the material. That's the basics, that's the foundation, right? After that, what we want is we need a transfer attribute node. So in this case, the transfer attribute node, we have if we go out to the side here, we have an input value color and an output color, the same vertex group. If we go here, if you remember the vertex colors, we have the vertex color group right here called col. And in col, in the geometry nodes, we need to get it and set it. So to get data, you use the group input node and you drag out or go into your group and create a new socket or data type, which we want as color, to get the color from the geometry, and we want to transfer it and mix it onto another attribute, which is the same color attribute to write out. So it's like we get the data, the color, and then we do some math on it and do some crazy stuff. We modify the information, and then we set the information again. So the group input is get the information, group output is set the information. In the modifier stack, the output attributes is set information, and the value attribute that we just created is called the get information. Basically, that's the workflow. Nice and simple. So what we want is we get the color from the vertex group and we transfer this to the points of the geometry that we have created with these instances. So up the top here, this is where things get interesting. Basically what we're doing here is, from what I understand, is we are counting, we are counting the instances. We want to know how many instances are here, right? So we get the index of what's here. So this index node is kind of like get the index, get the numbers of things that are here. That's the attribute we're trying to get with the attribute statistic. So we get the geometry that goes into here, and then we get the index of the things that exist, the index of the geometry. We get the maximum number, we add an extra number. So if we mouse over here, we have 25. So here earlier we have 24 vertices. We add one, we got 25 vertices. This is the threshold. So we got to make sure that the index that we're getting is less than 25, and we use this as the factor. As you could say, it's the factor of what, as you notice, it's a list of things. So every list needs a factor of color transferred from the original color of the mesh, mixed in with the transferred attribute of the nearest point. So this blows my mind, right? Because I'm learning how this is working today as this concept, which is a little bit abstract, but the transfer attribute gives me power to use the nearest point color to write the factor of a new color, which I could use as and set the color of the geometry on this material. Wonderful. So this means if we go out, it's basically where this green square is, the green drawing, or this purple drawing, or this black vertex, whatever the closest vertex color is to the instance geometry, based on a certain threshold of the instance count, or the vertex count, it was going to color those vertices. So thanks. Thanks, Gurpreet. You did. I really appreciate that. In Discord, he's currently called include BPY. Right, so we got this concept sorted. Now, if we go out into the material, let's just quickly switch over to the material. So here we have the geometry node tree. Here's the material node tree. Basically, to make this work with cycles and Eevee, with cycles, you can get the vertex color, which is now written by geometry nodes. But with Eevee, you have to get the attribute, the actual attribute. So you use the attribute node, switch to geometry, put in the name of the vertex group, and here we have the colors into the material. So that's basically this extra step you need to do to get the colors to see it inside Eevee. So that's what I needed. Perfect. Wonderful. Marvelous. Let's go back to color transfer with Billboards. Let the shader compile, go into the camera mode. So now I have the ability to instance and paint billboards with my Fernell concept to create these materials. Let's take a look at the comments. Slink says he's here, cool. And Slink also shared the channels for Bradley, Ben, and Erindale. He swears that the next 20 Blender Royales will be the MPR shader. So Nikit Sen asked, are the tooltips different than if you turn them on a regular Blender? I forgot how to turn it on, but there's an option for that. So it's like the same tips. Python. The Python tooltips, Kitty Sen, is inside interface, and you can just turn on Python tooltips. But the difference is basically don't show code. That's basically it. But the tooltips, yeah, the general white tooltip concept, not the light dark gray. That's the some of them are the same as Blender, but with this fork we added many tooltips, and we added separated many. In Blender you have like separate operators, but sometimes they have the same tooltip. The nodes, they don't have tooltips, you know, things like that. It's just a little minor detail, really. There we go. So that's how we use color transfer and instances, I guess you could say, to create the brushstrokes. And now my next challenge is actually working this paint effect a bit more so that I am happy with it. So to do that, I'm going to go back into the shader that I'm editing, and I'm going to edit some things. So the first things I edited was that the problem with realizing instances is you have no more UVs, so I have to use generated UVs. The next problem that I have is that I need some camera UVs to help improve some of the aspects. So now that, oh, and Devonshaw, if you're still here, the zeta depth is what you use from the camera data to drive the distance of the UV scale. Yeah. You use a logarithm, a base of 2, then you floor it, use a power, and you divide it by 2 again, and this will help you create, if we take a closer look and compile it. Notice that, let me just create a flat plane, copy the material, make it really big. Did it copy the material? I did. So if we take a look, you can see some things are darker further away, are up close. That's the scale that you want, right? And
So this is the stepping of scale of that paint texture.
exactly, this is what I'm using to scale the brush. So it's like using the camera distance to kind of drive the scale of the object. So the closer it is, the whiter it becomes, you know, the bigger the scale, to the point that it gets to white. Right? So this is the scale, I guess you could say, to help drive the brush stroke. That's the basics. JC and also Kalupsi, both of them help me with those. I highly recommend following them on Twitter if you can. Okay, so let's go back to the material. So you use the stepped logarithm, and you use this to scale the UVs, or scale the brush size. So now I have this brush texture, and I'm going to change it because I want a different brush texture. Let's see what ones I have. Oops, here it is, pictures. So the brush texture can be anything. You could use anything you paint from another software, or even your own. So there's this one here, could work. That's kind of a watercolor. So if I go back to my references, what I need is like an oil-based paint. So let's go back to my references. I need splotches like this. A blob of paint. Like a big thick blob of paint. So what I can do is I can actually probably do this in Krita. Make a new texture. Make it texture 1024 is fine. So when it's done, I'll just screen cap this effect and paste it in here as a monitor and change the values, or desaturate, sorry. So filter, color, no, sorry, adjust. I want to desaturate it. I'm going to use luminosity in this case. And I'm going to practically, so there's my general effect of the paint. Let's see what else I can use. Here's another one. So use this one. Same thing as a monitor. Filter, apply the desaturation. Probably move it up a bit so I can see it and scale it down. It's about the same size. And now I can just basically, this is how I make my brushes, right? I just try to make a tile, so you can go to the view, wraparound mode, and you can start to like, or you could do this in Blender even, you know, like do your scattering with your materials and your textures, or you create a material or your texture with a height map and everything you need to make it work. So I'm just going to be kind of relatively quick and dirty here. Just do things like this, duplicate and paste. And then from there, just flatten everything. Control E is to flatten. And then I can use this clone brush and start painting in my effects that I want. Nope. Probably doesn't look so good. A little bit like this. Full screen it. Just make sure there's no sharp lines. Make it a bit bigger. Do you guys know how to do tiling of procedural materials and with texture bashing inside Blender?
Nope.
No? Have you seen somebody do it before?
Yes.
Ooh.
Not me.
Not you. I guess it has something to do with modulo. Modulo and some other effects like that. Anti-seam is an add-on. Okay, no, thanks, Link. Oh, Slink, you had a piece of art that you made, right? Would you like me
Yes.
to take a look at it?
Yes. Yes.
All right. Let's take a quick look. So, thanks everyone for joining us. It's quite a big crowd, actually. So, let me just open up the original before we call it a day. We got another 10 minutes. So, Slink, tell me about your piece. Well, yeah, and also let's open up the mic. What do you guys think? What's your first impression?
Monkey.
Monkey with vines. Are you using Bagapie perchance?
I for sure am.
And also M-tree?
Yes. M-tree and Buggerpie.
What are you using for the grass?
There was a time period where scatter 5 was free, so I grabbed the free assets from there and placed them in a separate blend file so I can reuse them later.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's pretty good. All right, so what do you guys think? What do you think of this piece? Should we throw in some good critique, or should we throw in like good praise? Or should we go to the hard critique straight up? Feel free to open up your mic and we can go from there. What do you think, Devonshaw? What do you think of this piece? Is there something missing here?
The vegetation is good, but I feel like it'll help if there was some focal element, anything. Like, that's what
Monkey.
I think.
That's a good point, actually. If we take a closer look, it's like, if we take it into, like, for example, into a painting software, and just to show you here, I'm going to let me just save this as a texture. I'll save it into the right folder. 1 second. Pictures, textures, brushes. I'll call this brush number 4. Full screen it. Make a new one. Create from clipboard. Create as on monitor. Right, so you can see this image, right? And
I can see it.
good. Okay, so I'm going to desaturate it based on luminosity or lightness. But you can see that everything is almost a dark gray, right?
Yeah.
So you need to like think about your lighting. So for example, what you could do is imagine you have a sunlight and the sunlight is pointing through the trees.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can use, for example, I'm going to use an airbrush for now with a lighter color. And you could use, and I'm just going to use screen lighten, luminosity lighten. Whoop. Make it nice and soft. So what you can do is you can use like a ray of sunlight coming down and hitting the monkey, right? So that you have this light coming in and you're hitting the monkey in that particular area so that you can kind of see what's happening. Maybe with some guard rays or something. So that's one thing you can use. Is like you gotta, in this case, you have the basic elements of your scene, which is nice. But now you can start thinking about what you can do to create the focal point. So where should I look? So have you guys heard of the Fibonacci? Yeah?
No.
No?
No.
How about you, Lech or Devonshire? You guys, I'm glad you're here, Lech, actually. What is the Fibonacci? Do you guys know? Anyone?
It's a series of numbers where a number is the sum of the previous two numbers.
Okay, yep. And do you know what shape like the golden rule is?
Isn't it like a spiral?
Yes. Yeah. Pretty much. So the basic idea is like, do you guys know of the rule of thirds with composition?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's pretty much that, really, like golden rule. So the golden rule has like this point here. Let me just make sure I have a pen turned on. You have a point here. You have another point up there. And you kind of have this like spiral that comes out from a certain point, or the design that comes out from the image and kind of makes this snail shape over the actual image. And this snail shape has this kind of a concept where you have like a big piece and then you have it's divided into a third, right? Like this is one number and then you have another number. and then you have the same concept here. You have a big piece, and then you have the other one, like 2 cups of water, 1 cup of rice. And then you have another big piece where you have 2 cups of water and 1 cup of rice. And it goes on and on and on until you get to a certain point, like a spiral. 2 cups of water, 1 cup of rice. 2 cups of water, 1 cup of rice. 2 cups of water, 1 cup of rice. Or porridge, if you like oatmeal. But that's basically the concept of like the spiral in your composition. So in this case, you could say, all right, with the rule of thirds, you have your let's make a new layer. With the rule of thirds, I have basically this particular area here, and then I have this particular area here. Right? I'm just roughly doing like thirds, pretty rough, really rough. So I have this focal point here, I have this focal point here, I have this focal point here and here, basically. So if I'm following this frame, which is a 1920 by 1080, I assume, 16 by 9, then I need to think about, okay, so this is my focal point. So if this is my focal point, that means I could move my monkey slightly to the left and line the trees of the horizon a little bit higher so that it's lined up along here. So I could say, okay, so this is where my horizon is. This is like the middle part of the scene. And this is the foreground. Your foreground, perfect, great. But now you just need to get the light focus. But now we need to think about the colors. So if you're thinking about colors, you could say, okay, so with my colors, you could have, let's make a new layer. You could think about your colors like this. You could say, this part of the world, my 1 cup of rice is going to be in the light, and this part of the world is going to be in the dark, my 2 cups of water. So this means all of this part of the grass is in the shadow. This here is in the shadow. And the trees, just like you designed it, is in the shadow. But everything that the monkey is hit by the sunlight is in the light. So you start to balance your light based on this concept of 2 cups of water, 1 cup of rice. So, next concept. Do you guys know about rhythm? Rhythm or flow, perspective? Have you guys heard of those things before? Anyone? What do you guys think? Oh, Mark is here. Welcome. Have you heard of like, for example, perspective guiding lines or things like that before, JKR? Have you? Or Devonshire?
No.
No.
Oh, perspective guiding lines?
Yeah, I
So,
don't know
like-
what the official word is, but yeah.
Wait,
Oh,
can't you
yeah.
like turn them on in the viewport or something?
They're for doing perspective drawings, like architectural drawings and things of that nature.
Exactly. So you could do the same with this, right? So the reason why, for example, here we have this monkey, which is like, you have the middle ground, then you have the middle ground, and then you have the background. But it's super flat, right? So in this case, what you could do is you could rotate the camera to the left, and you could start to say, all right, foreground, middle ground, background. And then you start to decide how you're going to like make the monkeys lead like a cone like this, pointing somewhere. Everything is going somewhere. Your lines are going somewhere. So with your composition, with that concept of using the Fibonacci 2 cups of 1 rice, and the concept of your flow, you could use the 3D perspective a little bit to kind of exaggerate your depth of the scene. So right now, my depth is basically back, middle, front, and it's flat. So in this case, what you could do is you just rotate your corridors a little bit so that this side is kind of like the grass part. This part is the monkey part, and then everything else is kind of a lead-in. The rhythm of the trees, the rhythm of the grass in the background is going towards the horizon to some degree. So that's another thing you can keep in mind, unless you're working with, if this is intentional to kind of flatten the image based on humor, then sure, why not? But that's something you can think of, which you did start to do naturally with this flow right here. You did this quite nicely. Like this depth of field, you started to do it really well. So now it's just to think, okay, so how can you continue that flow with the rhythm that you have in the perspective to kind of make it work together, like the layers. You know, you have layer 1, layer 2, 1, 2, and 3, and then you have the hero asset. The hero asset is face door. You just need to work those perspective lines to kind of get that rhythm and that flow. Make sense?
Yeah.
Can I ask something?
Sure.
Is it still valid to just frame every asset in the middle of the screen on a white flat plane?
Like a symmetrical shot?
And no, like everything I've made in Blender Royale so far. I mean, after hearing this, I feel like if I ever do that again, I'm gonna like be cheating.
Well, it's okay. I mean, you can obviously... Oops, sorry. Let's make a new image. So for example, you can have symmetrical shots. That's perfectly fine. So for example, let's just get like a darkish gray and just fill it in a little bit. So you can have like a symmetrical shot where you have like an element here in the middle. You can, that's okay. But the flow still is the rule is still the same, or the rules still apply. Let me put it that way. So for example, if I have a symmetrical shot, notice that I have 2 cups of water, 1 cup of rice. Same thing here. I start to think of my lighting like this. I have 1 cup of 1 rice of sky and like 2 cups of the shadow. So if I go into here in this concept and I start to fill it in, and I start getting my lighting okay like this, and then start putting it into the ground, get like this color, make it a little bit darker, and start planning my lighting or whatever like this. My concept is the principles of the Fibonacci still apply even though it is symmetrized. Yeah? But it's just happening one side and the other side. Same concept. So you start to decorate your scene on that particular principle of how you want to design your world. You know? 2 cups of water, 1 cup of rice. Same thing with texture. You know? When you're working with texture, you could say the ground could be plain, so the plain color is the ground, but on the actual ball you actually have this an interesting kind of pattern going on, but everything else is not. So because of that, you start to think, okay, so this ball has an interesting pattern going on with its like specularity and normals and stuff, but the ground is going to be a lot more, I guess you could say, blurred out, you know, more diffuse. The reflection is more diffuse. The details on the actual hero object is super sharp. So the concept of using 2 cups of water, 1 cup of rice, 2 things that have almost nothing and 1 thing that has a lot of things, or a lot of weight or contrast or color or heaviness or hue or saturation or light and shadow, texture and brightness. If you keep that in your head, it can help your compositions a lot. And that's basically what is, these are the basic ground rules for like cinematography, design, and things like that. So I hope that, does it help you, Slink, with your piece? I know it's a big lesson on composition and things like that. A rough summary.
Yes, I still need to learn it. That's one. Yeah, I still need to learn composition, so yeah, very much helpful.
So it's basically rotate your camera, throw in a really strong sunlight onto the monkey, keep everything else in the shadow.
Monkey.
and you're good. Because the scene is really nicely well built. Like that vine stuff, the rocks, everything's cool. So you've got all the elements. Now it's just making it fit in the frame with a story. And composition is that. It's a story. That there was 2 cups of water and now there's 1 cup of rice. And we're making a delicious rice for lunch. And that's practically it. So composition is like you use a little bit of story with shapes and forms and texture and light and composition and contrast. Yeah. And then you're good. That helps you to tell the story of why is the monkey in a ruin, you know? And
Why not?
Yeah, why not? But it makes the eye follow where you want them to look, you know? The eye would first look quickly around and then goes down into the details. The eye looks for the contrast first, and then it looks for the shape, and then it looks for the details, the lines, the textures, and the actual element. The eye will try to look for the general shape first, kind of like that's how your brain kind of perceives information. It looks at the big picture first, and then it looks at the little picture. So if you lead your focus of the brain to that little point in the Fibonacci spiral concept, then you're helping the brain process the image in a more efficient way, and the person enjoys your image better. Hacking the brain, I guess you could say. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, more or less. All right. So I guess I'll capture this and send it to you guys. Why not? I hope you guys found this useful. I'm gonna wrap this session up and close the stream. So what do you guys think? Do you have any questions? Any more questions? Yeah. Do you have a topic that you'd like me to take a look at next week? Did this give you some idea of basically how the Painterly works? Devon Shaw, are you still here? Oh no, he's gone.
Thank you very much for your lessons.
Oh, thanks. And Reagan shared a link about understanding composition into the chat. Really good. Java loves it.
Okay, see you later.
See you, man. Yeah, thanks for joining. Oh yeah, Devonshire had to bounce quickly. And Kitty-san also says, Nakiti-san says, it looks really nice, but it lacks a real focal point because it's also dark and midtones. That's right. You could add some dappled light, which is like light through the trees, and one big ray or a guard ray as a main focal point. Just similar to what I did. Yeah, you're right. So thanks everyone for connecting. I hope you found this interesting and useful. I'll be continuing my progress with the volumetric stuff after lunch, but have a good afternoon, guys.
You too.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
See you next time, Java. I'm glad you found
You're
it
having
interesting.
lunch first before the post-critique party.
Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty hungry. But let me just close the stream here and let's begin.